Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Strategies to Address Current Trends in Law Enforcement Recruitment. Our presenters today are Amy Begoni, Manager of Test Rentals at CPS HR Consulting, Chrissy Peacock, who's Manager of Recruitment Solutions at CPS HR, and Bree Lopez, who's a consultant here at CPS HR. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few pieces of information about the webinar. To avoid interruptions to the presentation, all attendees are in listen-only mode. You can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so using the Q&A panel in your webinar dashboard. We'll make every effort to address your questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. Today's presentation is available on the CPS HR Consulting website and as a handout in your webinar dashboard. We'll also forward a link to all of today's attendees once the recording is available for viewing. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Amy, Chrissy, and Bree.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for joining us today. We're really appreciative for all of the participants on the webinar this morning. Law enforcement agencies across the country have been dealing with diminishing applicant pools necessary to maintaining staffing levels. We sent out a survey to our public service agency clients, of which 109 participants replied. We have three main goals for today's webinar. First, we will highlight common challenges public agencies have with law enforcement recruitment. Next, we will review successes that public service agencies have had with implementing both practical and unique law enforcement recruitment methods. And finally, we'll take some time to discuss tools and strategies that can easily be implemented within your organization. When we think about recruitment challenges in law enforcement, we first have to understand how we got here. We are aware of the more common issues such as increased attrition rates and shift in economy and job market, allowing for applicants to more easily obtain careers in fields outside of public safety. Agencies also have to compete with other local public safety agencies amongst police officers to obtain new talent. Given budget constraints, agencies do not always have the flexibility to enhance incentives or benefits to attract applicants to their agency over another agency. More recently, agencies have had challenging issues with generational gaps, including lack of maturity, lack of work ethic, demanding newer generations demanding more flexibility, and the lack of long-term commitment. Most of the newer generations are looking for a job and not a long-term career. Additionally, the current climate public perception of working in law enforcement agencies drives applicants away. As a result of the survey data that we received, we wanted to share some of the results around applicant volume, quality, and diversity. Aligned with the purpose of this webinar, 55% of our survey participants are unhappy with the total number of applications received. This is not surprising given the steady decline in law enforcement applicants and applications over the last 2 years. Some feedback we received from survey participants include that the reason for quantity issues can be due to careers in other fields that offer better pay or more flexibility. Additionally, benefit packages are not comparable or competitive to surrounding agencies and or the private sector. There's also more money and more safety in careers and jobs outside of law enforcement. Another challenge is recruiting officers who are interested in working and living in small cities or remote locations or rural locations. Additionally, to tie into that is the lack of options or assignments within a smaller agency. And then tying back into really the generational issues is that law enforcement is no longer seen as a desirable career path. It is really truly easier to obtain careers in other fields. When evaluating the quality of applicants, a little over 2/3 of our participants are either dissatisfied or feel neutral about the quality of the applicant pool. Many of the quality issues tie into retaining the applicants through the recruitment and selection process. Common issues that were shared among survey participants included not being able to have applicants that pass the background, individuals who are not unable to pass the drug test or the background of the drug use, especially with the current legalization of marijuana in some states. The length of the background or the in-depth of the background is too intrusive, and applicants tend to leave the process before it's completed. Candidate fit within a particular agency has been an issue. And one of the largest issues is really the no-call, no-show aspect of the applicants at different levels in the recruitment and selection process. Finally, when we talk about diversity, almost 40% of the participants in the survey were dissatisfied with the diversity of the applicant pool. And when we took that a step further, in the last set of data, we saw that almost 70% of our survey participants reported that there has been a decrease in diversity over the applicant pool over the last 3 years. The lack of diverse applicants, both in race and in gender, is a challenge for most public safety organizations. Some agencies have found success in partnering with local community and religious leaders to help recruit diverse applicants. Additionally, creating relationships with minority and women organizations to promote public safety opportunities has been beneficial. I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who's going to take us on to our next goal.
Okay, thanks, Chrissy. So Chrissy described the survey process that we went through, and what myself and Bree are going to do over the next few slides are talk through some of the ideas and suggestions that came from all of you, from all your peers, things that they've been doing and have been successful with. So we've summarized that. We'll talk about the trends, some specifics, and then after that we'll go into some of our recommendations as well. Our first group of ideas and suggestions is around recruiting. So first, posting and advertising. One of the top mentioned methods was around advertising, which makes sense in theory. The more you advertise, the more applications you should receive. A lot of comments about posting online. So, we can all agree that we're living in an online world, so that's how we reach potential applicants. There was, though, one comment about increasing print advertising, which I thought was interesting. There's so much focus on online job posting, it might be worth, paying attention or going back and evaluating if there are any print options that might, help create some applicants as well. Another interesting idea was doing research and advertising in areas where there are candidates, but a lack of job opportunities. So really being strategic about where to focus your recruiting efforts. So this does take research and some work up front, but could definitely pay off. There was, again, not surprisingly, a lot of comments about social media recruiting. There wasn't anything I saw that was like, oh, that's crazy. That's a, brand new idea. But I think just remembering that, as you move forward, that's where your applicants are, and that social media should be some part, have some role in your recruitment strategy. Job fairs were another very commonly mentioned method. So, going by the name of job fairs, career expos, recruitment expos, little different terms for them if you're searching for ones in your area. So either attending job fairs that are already scheduled or creating events of your own. So it sounded like there was a lot of success in actually creating your own recruitment event. So one example was an agency that held a women in policing event and had, from that 6 female applicants, go through their hiring process. Another mention of a solo public event, and then a job fair that was put on by an agency at a military institution. So that whole idea of focusing where there's candidates, available, remember that transitioning military personnel are a potential, or a pool of potential applicants. So that's something to keep in mind also. Community involvement, so creating those community partnerships, being active, having booths at community events, using coffee with a cop, business organizations was something that was mentioned. Police departments are often already involved in community activities anyway as part of their internal work. So just, make sure that you're partnering with them and, thinking of every event as a potential recruiting event. Colleges and high schools are another great source for your recruiting efforts. So sometimes there's actual events that you can attend. Sometimes that's in the form of classroom visits. At the high school level, there was a recommendation to work with junior ROTC programs. While you're in high school or in high school, it's a good opportunity to remind everyone of the background requirements for law enforcement. If they're interested in a career, they might want to start making good choices now. And I think this is a good reminder, incorporating high schools into your recruitment plan, that recruitment should be a long-term strategy. So as you go into high schools and you're starting to build your, pipeline of people interested in law enforcement careers, those people aren't going to apply tomorrow. So it's not going to spike your numbers. But you are, again, planning for the future and fostering those relationships that hopefully help you down the road. Academies was commonly mentioned. So, and these recommendations are geared towards people that are in the academy non-affiliated with an agency already. So they are not being sponsored by a department or a city or a county. So this is not about poaching currently employed people in the academy. But there are people that go through the academy who are just getting that requirement, underway for application in the future. So be involved in the academy, have a presence, participate in instruction if you can, have your command staff there talking to people and building those relationships, and then hopefully they will apply to your agency when they are done. The next thing I'll talk about is the application process. So the whole point of this webinar is that it's already difficult to get applications. So once people are ready to apply, you want to make sure that you're making it easy for them and that you're not losing them because of a cumbersome application process. So if you aren't already accepting online applications, that is a convenient way. I think the expectation for most people is they can apply online. Just really, making sure you're looking at your application and you're not asking for things up front that you might not need up front, anything that could discourage somebody from finishing that application process. There's also a recommendation around, and this isn't something that's going to probably help with your numbers with getting a higher quantity of applications, but once you have somebody either applying or interested in applying, offering some sort of preview of the job. So this agency actually offered a 6-hour observation program that allowed candidates to spend time in the environment. So they can really, they're already getting accustomed to the job, but they can also self-select out. So I know we want to raise numbers, but you also want to make sure that you have the right people going through your process. And sometimes, showing them the not so great parts of the job might, help make sure you don't waste your time on people that aren't interested. Increased communication with applicants throughout the process. Someone even used the term aggressive. In one agency, the chief actually reaches out to applicants to tell them that he wants them to be a part of their team.
I totally agree with that, Amy. And to add to that, agencies should really consider developing a strategic communication plan to keep applicants engaged and informed throughout the recruitment and selection process. One of the comments we heard earlier was that agencies see a no-call, no-show drop-off rate at each stage of the process. Sometimes this can be due to lack of sufficient communication and or engagement with the applicants. Additionally, some public agencies have found success in creating a buddy program where new recruits or seasoned police officers are assigned to check in with groups of applicants via email or phone throughout the recruitment selection process. This strategy tends to keep applicants engaged and committed to the process as they feel they have a personal connection with the agency and therefore will more likely show up to each step in the process. Another area that agencies should definitely consider is creating a branding strategy. To help make your recruitment efforts stand out, public agencies have found success in creating a memorable tagline for their recruitment efforts to increase awareness. For example, one public agency used the recruitment slogan, "Taking the Lead." They included this slogan on all recruitment materials, advertisements, and social media plugs. They even took it a step further by creating and tying in modified forms of the slogan into steps in the recruitment and selection process. For example, the agency developed a study session, which was a free course to applicants for prepping for the written exam, and they used the slogan, "Prepping to Lead." They also offer practice sessions for the physical abilities test and used the slogan, "Fit to Lead." Carrying the slogan throughout different steps of the recruitment process increased recognition and awareness of the agency's recruitment efforts.
Thanks, Chrissy. Yeah, and some of the, we did get a couple questions, that came in before the webinar, and some of them were around, if I'm a smaller agency or a rural agency, how do we get people to apply for us? And sometimes if you're not going to be competitive with, pay or benefits, sometimes having that branding, having that message, if you're, if you have if you give the candidates a good feeling about your organization, that could be a way that you would entice them to come work for you versus, somewhere where they might be paid a little bit more. The last thing that I'll mention in this area is having a recruitment team. So as you'll see, going through this webinar, there's a lot of stuff you can be doing. You're probably doing some of it already. There's probably a lot more things that you would like to incorporate into your recruitment program, but that takes time. And so there were some reported successes in actually either hiring additional staff or assigning staff to recruitment, whereas as a primary job, whether that's in human resources or the police department. The next area is around pay and benefits. There is less content here, which again, makes sense because changing pay and benefits it's a more costly solution. There's also usually some red tape involved in doing that. But it is still a strategy, and it is something that some folks are doing. The most obvious would be salary. So if you're trying to make a position more attractive, increasing the salary to be more competitive with some of the other career options Chrissy was mentioning can definitely help. If you can't raise salary, then perhaps there's some sort of hiring or signing bonus that you could offer. In terms of benefits, the two ideas that were mentioned were take-home vehicles, so either providing them, or if you're already providing them, increasing the radius. That could entice people to want to work for your agency. And then more flexibility and time off, which is, I think, as the workforce evolves, I think that flexibility and time off are becoming things that are valued by potential applicants. Lateral incentives, this is, hiring laterals is absolutely a strategy. By hiring a lateral, you solve your problem and then create a vacancy for someone else. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but it should still be something that you are thinking about. Hiring incentives or bonuses for lateral hires could help you in that area. And then the last thing here is academy sponsorship. So I talked about recruiting at the academy on the previous slide. So going to people who are in the academy without, an affiliation. But actually, if your minimum qualifications allow hiring people pre-academy and then sponsoring them as they go through the academy is a way to make your position more enticing. It's a costly option, but it could be a very big motivator for people who are looking for a career in law enforcement, but the cost of going through an academy would prohibit them from doing that. All right, so moving on to the examination process. So a couple things about the exams themselves. I'm making an assumption here that the vast majority of agencies do have some sort of examination process for their law enforcement positions. So first, looking at your passing scores to make sure that they are appropriate. So are you setting your passing score? I mean, we don't want any of these recommendations to result in lowering standards because that is hiring quality applicants is absolute. I mean, that's everybody's goal. But you just want to look at your passing scores and make sure that you're not eliminating quality applicants. For example, I know 70% is the pass point we love. But perhaps for your process, 65% is actually just fine, and would be that that number of moving forward minimally qualified people. Look at your retest policy. For example, if you make someone wait 12 months to reapply after failing a test, you could shorten that timeline to 3 months or 6 months. Offering examination prep. So this could be study guides for a written exam or practice for a physical ability. I know that's sometimes a big hurdle is getting people that can meet the physical requirements of the job. So offering workshops, practice tests, things like that to make sure that people can pass those components. And then somebody mentioned making the physical fitness test and written test pass-fail. So that's not going to change necessarily the number of candidates going through a process, but it could help with the diversity of the candidates who are reachable for hiring. The next trend we saw was streamlining the examination process. So there's definitely a trend towards expediting the process. There's a lot of competition and people just expect things to move quickly. So you don't want to lose applicants because your process took too long. So an example of this would be offering the written exam and the physical agility test on the same day. So you can score on site, have them go straight into the physical agility test, and you don't risk that candidate would be a no-show for the next part of your process. So the goal here really is just to look at your process and see how you can reduce the time from application to eligibility list and even to hire. If you have high enough numbers, you also might want to consider creating a large eligibility list. So if you test every time you have a vacancy, maybe you could just do a larger exam and create a one-year eligibility list. That way, anytime a vacancy comes up, you already have people that have gone through your selection process that you can move forward. Flexibility was another theme. So being flexible with the candidate, offering on-demand or ongoing testing. So maybe, if you're only offering testing on a Saturday, Saturday, April 4th, and that's probably not even a Saturday, but, and they have a wedding that day, now that person is no longer part of your process. So offering, different options, times that are outside of people, normal working hours, so having weekday and weekend options could definitely help accommodate candidates and raise your numbers. Traveling testing locations. So I know I talked about doing research and seeing where there might be a lot of candidates, so, high population, but not as many jobs. So one idea is to take your recruitment and your selection process to that area. A lot of times applicants aren't going to pay the cost of flying out to your agency, sometimes multiple times, flying out to take a written exam, flying back out for an interview. So taking that to them, putting them through the whole process from start to finish, from application to test, would be a way to increase your geographic range and tap into candidates that you wouldn't normally have access to. And then the last thing that was mentioned was interviews. And again, this is more of a quality than a quantity. So changing your interview process isn't going to change the number of people that apply for your job, but it will hopefully increase the quality of those hired, which, reduces cost of, turnover. So some things about interviews that were mentioned, making sure that your interview panel has the right people on it. So making sure that it's a diverse panel and that you have the right stakeholders involved, whether those are, community members, human resources personnel, department personnel, and that's going to vary based on what you're looking for, but really put some thought into who you have on your interview panel. Somebody actually mentioned training for oral interview panels, so that made me extremely happy to read. But it is ensuring that you have training. It really ensures that your interview process is working as it should, and that there's not, bias happening or some personal opinions creeping in that shouldn't be there, but that your interview process is working again as it should. And then also some talk about making sure that you're asking the right questions. So for example, if you don't require law enforcement experience as a minimum qualification, you don't want to ask law enforcement specific questions as part of your interview. You would be unintentionally screening people out that you shouldn't be. So look at your minimum requirements and make sure that your interview questions are at an appropriate level. And then making sure you're measuring the characteristics that are important to your department. So, for example, problem solving, ethics, whatever those areas are, make sure that you're asking questions that elicit responses in those areas. And then the last thing here, we talked about exam prep for written exams and physical ability tests, but one agency is also offering orientations that go over what to expect in the interview process as well. So, to prep people as much as they can so that they can show up and do their best when they interview. Okay, all right, I am going to turn it over to Bree.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So moving forward, I am going to talk about backgrounds and MQs and looking at the processes that we go through when doing this. So oftentimes when we start talking about making changes to MQs or changing the background process, there's unfortunately like a negative connotation around that, as if changes would be lowering standards. And that's really not what any of us are trying to do. We're not trying to lower standards. We're just trying to look at things that we could do differently. So through our survey results and through some additional research that we have done, we have found that departments have been making changes to change what they're looking for in those backgrounds, and they've actually increased the quality of their applicant pool by making some slight adjustments to what those MQs are without lowering anything at all. So rather than lowering standards, making changes moving forward, departments have indicated that moving towards actually a more thorough background than in the past has led to an increased quality candidate that they would be hiring. So spending time and resources on the front end to make sure that you have the right people in place who are actually conducting and doing those backgrounds. So whether that means sending people from inside your organization to background investigator school or hiring organizations on the outside who are completing these backgrounds for you, but making sure that you're getting the right people to conduct those backgrounds has led to not only a more efficient process, so the backgrounds are completed in a more efficient manner, but the hires overall have been better. So many departments are seeing an increased number of candidates who are successfully making it through an academy, making it through department FTO programs, and then ultimately passing probation. So really putting some time at the front end, people who are these people who are putting these background packets together, who is looking at this material, who are you sending to background school, who are you contracting with to go ahead and complete those backgrounds. So spending some time on the front end and really making sure you have a more thorough background. So whatever your MQs are, that's okay, but making sure that those backgrounds really dig in to make sure that the people who you're passing through are really meeting those MQs. Additional departments have really agreed with that, and they've taken additional steps to conduct more thorough and intense backgrounds. And Amy talked a little bit about quality versus quantity. So obviously the quantity goes down here, but I think that's okay because as the quantity goes down, the quality of each hire has been increasing. Another idea was changing the order of a background or a hiring process. So one department talked about how they were losing candidates after their poly. So we all know conducting a poly exam, going through that is something that doesn't take very long. I mean, I think it's about an hour, maybe 2, maybe 3. But moving that polygraph exam up in the process and then putting people through a background. So if you're losing people at a step that's really not isn't such a drain on resources, it's cheaper to do, it doesn't take as much time. So putting that before your 6, 8, 10-week background process, if you're going to screen people out on that poly anyway. Now, I know there may be times that for a poly, you're going to go back and ask somebody a question regarding what you found in the background. Okay, so then maybe you can send them through a poly again. But if you're going to screen people out based on questions that you're asking in that examination, it may be worth it to put that on the front end before you put them through an intensive background process. It would save the department time and money. So just weeding those people out before that step. This department found by doing so, as they moved candidates forward, the candidates who they moved forward to backgrounds were typically more successful in being hired. And along the same lines, another department talked about really diving in and digging into the questions that they were asking in their psych. We put our people through these intense psychological exams, but what are we asking? Are we asking questions that are actually going to lead to a more successful hire, to somebody who's going to be a better police officer? I've seen some questions that we ask on psychological exams and making sure we're keeping up with the time. I remember seeing a question on one that asked candidates, who is Cleopatra? Now, we know who Cleopatra is. People who are now 18, 19 years old, I'm not sure if they're going to have the same knowledges that we do, and is that really going to be indicative of job performance as a police officer? So really focusing on that psychological exam and the questions that are being asked. All right, the next idea is always challenging to talk about, but it's changing those automatic disqualifiers. So we have, facial hair, we have tattoos, people have experimented with drugs, marijuana in the past. So departments have now taken some of those automatic disqualifiers and maybe put time frames around them. So instead of looking at somebody who's experimented with marijuana maybe 2-3 years ago, that may have been something that was just an automatic disqualifier, really looking at that, taking the time into account and changing those automatic disqualifiers and putting time constraints around them. Same thing with tattoos. People who are in the military are potential hires. And oftentimes our military personnel do have tattoos. And I think really looking at, okay, somebody has a tattoo on their forearm that says mom, probably has a different meaning than somebody who has a tattoo on their forearm that is of brass knuckles, right? So if a community member is going to be arrested or get into an altercation with an officer and they see brass knuckles on their arm, that's going to have a different impact for the department than looking at somebody who has mom written on their forearm. So really taking each of those different circumstances and taking it into account and treating it appropriately. So looking at all of those MQs, those automatic disqualifiers, and kind of adjusting them to what the needs are in your organization. So I think overall it's pretty safe to say that a more thorough background may lead to more successful hires, and then hopefully attrition rates go up from that too, and retention rates would go up as well, in making sure that we keep those hires. Okay, so now looking at moving forward, some of the tools and strategies. So we've talked a lot about what organizations have done. We've talked about kind of how we got here, but we do have some ideas from some tools and strategies that we think would be helpful. And once again, these aren't going to fit everybody. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing, but hopefully some of these would be helpful for your individual organization. So the first thing is developing realistic job previews. So realistic job previews, for those who aren't familiar, it's a really good way to communicate the good and the bad characteristics of a job before a hiring process even begins. Okay, so a realistic job preview should give a potential candidate, or really anybody in that matter, an idea of what a position would look like. It should be a very well-rounded description that details exactly what somebody could expect while working as a police officer. So I mentioned the good and the bad, right? So anybody should be able to look at this position, click on a link, and say, okay, the day in the life of a police officer. This is what they go through in this organization. I think there is a lot of change that has happened with police work. There's a lot more community-oriented policing. It's not just going out there and taking bad guys to jail. It's so much more than that. It's not what we see on TV. And I think that creating something to show this is what we would really go through. This is what our work looks like. You know, it's not all this glory that some people may think it is. There's shift work. Shift work not fun. Sometimes you're assigned to details that you may not be interested in. You may work in unideal areas, areas that have higher crime. Or maybe it's an area that has lower crime, and that's not what you're interested in. So really giving a realistic job preview of what that job entails on the front end before a candidate even applied for the job. And that's something that would be easy to do. You could create a link on your website. If you have apps on your phone, that's something that is very easy to create. And that should work for really any job in a police organization as well. The next idea is onboarding. So we all have onboarding or new employee orientation, but these onboarding programs are extremely important. So being proactive with our new employees and helping them acquire not only the knowledge and skills they need to be successful as a police officer, but what are the cultural norms in your organization? Okay, so how do you become not only a member of the team, but now you're an insider of this organization, right? And so becoming a team member, becoming somebody who is actually a part of that organization. We learn things in orientation that, yes, obviously we need to know about what to do on the job, but feeling a part of the team and learning things like, you know, if you park in this parking structure past 9 p.m., you're not going to be able to get out without talking to security. Or on Thursdays, there's farmers market, and if you don't show up early, you're not going to be able to find a place to park. So really onboarding these people, teaching them, hey, this is what you really need to know about who we are, what we do, how we function, how we run, and becoming a part of that team and feeling like an insider for that organization. Ultimately, people want to feel included. People want to do a good job, and really taking that time on the front end to make sure that they have everything that they need to be successful. Hopefully, you know, as people feel a part of a team, they feel like an insider. That would lead to not only greater success on the job, but better retention rates as well. Another idea is, and Amy talked about this a little bit, is our flexible testing strategies. So there's a lot of different things we could do instead of, you know, on Saturdays at 8 a.m. we have a written exam at this location followed by a physical agility followed by an oral interview. Sometimes it's hard for people to make that. People have other jobs, have other commitments, school, children, family. So we thought of remote proctoring as an idea. So we all have written exams. So with written exams, it's not always easy for people to travel to make a specific time and date to take a 2-hour exam. Remote proctoring or online testing gives organizations a way to reach a much larger potential applicant pool, and departments are able to test people at all different times. So it's not necessarily at 2 o'clock on this Saturday. So if you had online testing and you had a link that candidates were able to access for that exam, you could test whenever you wanted to test your candidates, whenever they were available. Not only is the time schedule for the candidate easier, for you, results are immediate. So scoring is completed at the click of a button. So a candidate completes their exam online, they click submit, and you have those results immediately. So there's no lapse in time before, if they need a certain score to move forward in the process, you have that immediately. So reaching a much larger number of people is always an ideal situation, and then getting those scores immediately really cuts down that time in between steps in the process. Another idea is regional collaboration. So most times, if you look around where you are, departments in the same county or the same geographic area are all simultaneously hiring for the same position. So I know where I live, I can think of 6 different agencies right now who all have open recruitments for entry-level police officer. And I understand that in a way everybody is in competition with each other, but an idea is to really pull those departments together, pull resources together, and collaborate and create a large applicant pool, right? So if everybody pulls their resources, their time, their energy, create one applicant pool, and then send them through those testing processes. So everyone could still have their own NQs, the same different scores that they needed to achieve on a written exam, but you would be able to funnel those applicants where they are a best fit. So oftentimes candidates are going to apply to multiple agencies at the same time because they need a job, right? So they're going to apply to these 6 different agencies, even though they know if agency A makes me a job offer, that's where I'm going. But in the meantime, agency B may have made a job offer, and they're going to accept the conditional job offer, but they haven't heard from organization A yet. And as soon as they do, they tell you that they're not moving forward with you anymore. And now you've really put a lot of time and resources in a hire that really wasn't ever interested in your organization at all. So by pulling everybody together and then creating different paths throughout that process that will lead candidates to the departments where they're a best fit is another idea to really collaborate and work together. We also have consistency in branding, and I know this is something that we talked about a little bit, but differentiate your department, right? So who are you? What do you stand for? How do you deliver your message? Let people know that ahead of time. It kind of goes back to that realistic job preview. You know, what do you stand for? Who are you? Some organizations are big on community policing, some are not. So if you have people who are not interested in that role in the community, they might not be a good fit for you. Let them know from the beginning. You have to have the right people. I think we all agree that while quantity is important, the quality takes you so much further. So making sure from the onset, from the very beginning, potential applicants understand who you are, and they know that through the entire process, and they're going to live by that through their career, as long as your message is consistent. And with our recruitment strategies, really being strategic in what we're doing. Who are we focusing on? Amy talked about, you know, going to areas where there may be potential applicants, but there are not career opportunities. So making sure that we are going out, reaching all those folks who have interest in this work, but really don't have the ability to apply. And this goes back to offering those flexible testing strategies as well. So pulling all of this together, reaching the max amount of people that we really can, and then really trying to help people as they move forward to be successful in that process. And like Chrissy talked about, creating that buddy system. So as somebody applies, if they're interested, give them a partner in the organization, somebody who they can talk through this process, and where they actually feel a commitment to the organization to see things through. Or to be upfront and honest with somebody if it's really not for them. They may go through and say, you know what, this isn't for me. And it's better to know that on the front end as well. Okay, so that is what we have as far as our tools and our strategies, and hopefully some of those work for some of you. I know they're not all a one-size-fits-all idea. We do have a post-webinar survey that we're going to be sending out to you, and that will come out after we finish with our webinar today. We do have some questions that we got as we went through this webinar. So we are going to try to respond to some of those and try to give you some additional answers for these.
Yeah, so the first question that came in, so with regard to background screening, when do you suggest the conditional job offer should be signed by the candidate? Typically that's something that you would do, after your written exam or your physical agility test, but before you do a background or a polygraph.
I also think that is probably something legally that you have to do at a certain time. So I know that there were times like there's agencies who are not able to conduct background or a thorough background to complete that background until that's signed. So starting a background is okay, but not making that background complete until you actually have that conditional offer signed.
And those laws could probably vary state by state, so make sure that your process is correct for where you are. Do you have any online vendors you love? Yes, CPS HR Consulting. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, I don't know who asked this question, but do you have any online vendors for advertising, for testing, for I don't know.
Remote proctoring maybe.
We do, yes. If you're interested in remote proctoring, we do have a vendor we work with. Please put that in your post-webinar survey, and we'd be happy to reach out and give you more information on that. Yeah, if this was your question, if you want to provide additional clarification on what types of online vendors, yeah.
Here's another question that just came in asking, what about recruiting videos? Do you think they're worth the time and money?
I think especially, well, there's a couple things there, right? So the first is branding, and if you have a recruiting video, like you can tie in your brand, and I also think you're sending a message that you're progressive, you have this, you have videos, you're cool. And then Bree, I think this might tie in.
So yeah, I did want to add into that. So I've seen recruitment videos before that are amazing. It's exciting. It's police work. They're in their SWAT outfits and they've got their dogs and they're taking down bad guys. And while that is exciting for people to see, I think that's one piece of the job. And I think we also need to make sure that we're representing all aspects of this job. We have internal affairs, we have detectives, we have community outreach. There's so much more that goes into it. So making sure that those recruitment videos are a true representation of what the position is. And it kind of goes back to that realistic job preview too. So if you get that out on the front end, I think it's going to save you really sending people through a process that may not be the right fit.
So the next question has come in, are any of the agencies we surveyed using iDetect instead of or in conjunction with the polygraph test? That didn't come out in our survey, so we're not sure if any of the agencies who responded are using that technique.
Okay, I have another one here. Excuse me. When can you open the PHS? We currently have candidates bring their PHS to the interview. If they pass, we open it. If they fail,
We mail it back to them. We often find automatic disqualifiers in the PHS. Can we open the PHS before an interview?
So so the question was, when can you open a PHS? And I think
personal history statement.
Personal history statement, sorry. So I think that you can open that. I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't open that. Once again, check with your laws in the state where you are located. But go through that PHS and do a pre-screening interview before you start a background, because you're going to find things in that packet. You're like, okay, not going through backgrounds with us. And another recommendation may be, and I think that question might have said that they do this, but give candidates that PHS. If you're doing an orientation and you're having people come in, give them a PHS. Let them see what this background is actually going to entail, because they may read that PHS and think, okay, you know what, I already know I'm not going to make it through this process, and they'll screen themselves out. So I think actually giving them that to fill out on the front end may be successful too, in kind of weeding some people out who may not make it through. But I think it's okay to open those and read those before an interview, because that really shouldn't, the PHS is different.
You might not want your interview panel reviewing it though. So you might review that before the interview stage, but that wouldn't be something that you would want to give to your interview panel because of potential bias.
Yeah, I would recommend, like Amy said, different people should be doing different things in that process and keeping that separate. Okay, so I have another question that came in. And it says, of the recruitment tools and strategies you've recommended, which of these have been successful in larger agencies? So agencies that have sworn personnel of, 500 plus.
So I think it ties back to really a couple of things. So first is really developing a strategic and comprehensive recruitment plan that includes your outreach efforts with community leaders, a advertisement plan that includes a branding, and then also what we just talked about with recruitment videos, realistic job previews. But also to that point, it is really, really, really important to ensure that you have that strategic communication plan for the candidate. Keeping the applicants engaged is really what drives the total number at the end, especially in showing up for those different hurdles in the recruitment and selection process. And really, to what Amy said, somebody commented that even being aggressive with your communication plan, you will have applicants that are going to apply that never intend to get through the entire process from the beginning. And then you have applicants that may just need a little push and a little encouragement. And they could be, your best hires down the line.
Thanks, Chrissy. And then one additional question that just came through is, what are some ways you have found to be successful in reaching applicants with a limited recruitment budget? And I think some of the things that we actually talked about, especially online testing, that's really not going to cost you much more money at all. It's a way to reach more people, and that really shouldn't have an impact on a recruitment budget. You don't have to go out and travel to some of those areas where those candidates may be, those potential hires may be, but yet you have the ability to have them begin that process with online testing.
Additionally, really promoting and communicating through your social media accounts. The newest thing is Instagram, and I know it's really hard to use Instagram in some cases, but the shift, especially with the generation change, is really going from Facebook and LinkedIn to Instagram, and so really fully utilizing all social media accounts to promote. That's free. It's easy to do, and you can get a lot of exposure to a lot of different applicant pools.
I think another question came in. Are there any agencies you can recommend that have a strong branding message and strong social media presence that we can take a look at? Fill out, if this is your question, fill out the survey afterwards. We'll contact you directly. Without an agency's permission, I don't want to announce them on a recorded webinar, but we'll talk you through some examples afterwards. directly.
Okay. Other questions? Okay.
There a couple of questions came in on recruiting for dispatch positions. You know, I think that, you know, the focus of this webinar was really for entry-level law enforcement, you know, police officer positions. However, you know, I think you can, hopefully these strategies, though, you know, you could pick and pull from, and there are things that would be helpful no matter what, you know, what position it is that you're recruiting for.
I'm not sure if we mentioned this, but one of the other areas really was how to really target, you know, diverse applicants. And there are vendors out there that can promote positions to a large quantity of minority and women and veteran-owned organizations, and that definitely increases your the exposure of your recruitment to those agencies, therefore tending to increase the diversity of your applicant pool. So, and they're at a nominal cost. Again, if you want some more information about that, you can put that in the post-webinar survey, and we can provide you with some of that vendor information.
Somebody just asked, how have law enforcement agencies been recruiting without poaching or taking the same applicants away from other agencies? And I think that happens, and Amy mentioned, you know, hey, that is a strategy that some agencies have. Ultimately, you need to fill your vacancies, but hopefully working with each other rather than against each other is something that we also take into account. And really looking at who's the right fit for what department, because you don't want somebody who you're going to hire who's just waiting to get hired by another organization.
Yeah, and, you know, pay attention, you know, to the messaging, so getting the right person in there. And then, I mean, retention is also an important, that's not the topic of this webinar, but if you don't want your candidates to be poached, you know, sometimes it's not just about pay. I mean, oftentimes people are willing to forego a nominal pay increase to stay in a job that they love. So look at your retention strategies as well, your climate, your environment, your morale, you know, things like that, you know, engagement if you're wanting people to not be poached.
Absolutely. Okay, excellent. So, okay, well, with that, I want to thank you, Amy, Chrissy, and Bree, for a great presentation, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Again, we will send an email with a link to today's recording and the slide deck. In the meantime, you can check our website regularly to see this recording when it becomes available, and recordings from all of our previous webinars. And be sure to sign up for our next HR series webinar, which will be on April 17th, Building Employee Engagement, a Roadmap and Lessons Learned. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye.